So, you know, when we started, immediately when coronavirus was breaking out in China in December and January, we were paying close attention to topics like disinformation and just basically trying to find the truth behind what's really going on here. And that is kind of the central theme to a lot of problems that are happening around coronavirus right now, is that people just don't know who to trust or where to go for good information. And that goes for cyber threats too. So we wanted to compile kind of a high-level overview of some of the cyber threats that we've been observing over the past few months. So before I start digging into that, I'd like to introduce myself formally. My name is Charity Wright. My background is US Army. I served in the Army for 10 years and just recently, a couple weeks ago, retired for medical retirement. But I served for 10 years and I joined the Army to be a Chinese linguist, not really knowing what that meant at the time. They sent me to school to learn Mandarin for a couple of years, and then when I was done, they stationed me at the National Security Agency in Hawaii. When I was at the agency for about 4 years, I got some really good experience analyzing intelligence, not just doing translations, but really digging into what is intel, what is the most valuable information that's going to protect our US and allied assets in the Pacific. So that was a really great experience. I credit the military for my career today. But in 2015, I was done with my bachelor's degree and I decided to jump into cyber threat intelligence because I feel like cyber security and cyber is basically the future of warfare. And that's really where I wanted to place my skills. So once I jumped into cyber threat intel, I started working at a startup here in the Dallas area where I'm based. And it was a secure hosting company. So I got some really great experience doing CTI with the SOC, sitting there in the SOC, working with those analysts and with the incident response team as well. And then from there, I went to Hilton Worldwide and then ended up at Ernst & Young doing internal CTI with a very mature CTI team there. So kind of a variety of CTI experience in different environments. But over those years, I discovered that I really love and have a passion for dark web and criminal underground forums and collecting intelligence from those sources. So last year I made the big jump over to the vendor side and I work for Insight Cyber Intelligence. We really specialize in deep and dark web at Insights, and we provide that intel to other organizations like your companies, government institutions, things like that. We're an international company. So it's been a very exciting journey the past year, just really digging into those dark web forums, working undercover, collecting intelligence, and providing, that timely, relevant, tailored intel is what we really love. So that's about me. If you guys, ever want to reach out to me, you can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. Very active on those platforms as well. And I share a lot of the intel and the insights that we get at our company. Okay, so just a high-level overview of some of the topics we're going to cover today. Phishing trends, and this is all related to COVID threats. Phishing, malware trends, ransomware. We're going to talk about frauds and scams that we find on the dark web. And then, threats to remote workers, because that's what a lot of us are most concerned about right now. And then I'll finish up with a little section on disinformation on the dark web and how threat actors are actually selling disinformation as a service. And just some examples of what we've seen related to disinformation around COVID. Okay, so let's start here. The first topic that we really wanted to cover, and by the way, this is related to a report that Insights just published. We wrote We wrote a couple weeks ago, we published it, I think last week. It's called COVID-related cyber threats or something. We started the report with the topic of phishing domains, because we had been tracking through our own platforms, tracking the registration of different domains related to coronavirus or COVID. The graph here shows the exponential rise in the number of domains registered using those terms, coronavirus and COVID. So while in 2019, on the left side, you'll see only 190 domains used the words corona and COVID, in January of 2020 alone, that number was over 1,400. And then during February, registrations jumped to over 5,000. And then in March, it was over 38,000 domains registered with those terms. While a few of them are legitimate, most of them are phishing domains. So interesting how every month the registrations have increased exponentially. And while we expected this to a certain extent, we predicted it to a level, we did not expect it to this scale. And now in April, the numbers are even bigger. So we really wanted to dig in and find out, what exactly are these being used for? What kind of malware is it pushing out? And are any of these directly, phishing our customers, employees or customers, basically? Examples of phishing domains are countless. Some of them claim to give you information on infection rates, infection totals, news, cures, tests, you name it. It's out there, and many of them are hosting malware or trying to steal your credentials. This slide right here actually is specific to the word corona and shows you, this is a view inside of the Insights risk analyzer platform where we looked at those domain registrations. You can see how much I know, right? I'm very passionate about this as well. Okay, this right here is also a view inside the Insights platform, looking at just an example of a phishing domain, COVID-19, next.com, covidtotals.com, tons of them out there. Some of them have websites already launched on their domain, some of them don't. And so one of the ways that you can defend against these is to detect the domain as soon as it's registered, especially if it's related to your assets, like if something is trying to mimic a page of yours or phish your employees. The important part is to get that taken down before they launch a website or a phishing campaign. Okay, let's talk about emails. I don't know about you guys, but just in the first few weeks that it really broke out in the United States, I was like overwhelmed with emails from every single company that I've ever given my email address to. It's like, if I see another email that says we care about your health and safety, if I see another one, I'm gonna go crazy. But threat actors know that. They predicted, they're waiting for a pandemic like this, and they take advantage of our willingness to click on these types of emails for information. There's many phishing emails currently in circulation that use the pandemic as their theme. And this example here includes a phishing email that impersonates Department of Homeland Services and redirects victims to a malware download address. So, and then the email on the right side of the screen, I'm actually going to cover exactly what that email is when we get to the malware section. So these are just a couple of examples. I find it interesting too. Some of them have malicious links in them. Some of them have malicious documents attached, but they've been very successful all around the world in using this theme to lure people. Cybercrime utilizing COVID-19. So we know for a fact right now, COVID-themed lures are being bought, sold, traded, and taught all over the criminal underground right now. And they sell these types of tools and infrastructure as a service, just out of the box, ready to go, which we can cover a little bit more in a little while. This particular post is from a dark web forum where people are actually looking for virus-themed email templates, and they collaborate in the dark web. They're working together. A lot of them are trying to help each other because there's just so many people around the world to take advantage of and to scam and fraud. It's like they don't even have to really share the profits. They're all out for themselves, and they help each other and tutor each other in these types of things as well. At the beginning of the COVID outbreak, we started seeing a lot more posts like this one where people were looking for resources. Not as many people are like coding their own malware or creating the phishing emails. More of them are just like buying it from other people and using it for their own campaigns. This is another example. We actually pulled this from a Russian dark web forum, but this is a fake coronavirus map. Looks just like the real one published by Johns Hopkins. And an email went out phishing people to go to this map, which was actually a malicious duplicate of the Johns Hopkins map. So you remember in the first few weeks, especially when everybody was tracking the spread of COVID, these types of maps were really popular. I don't know if they still are, honestly. I just try to stay away from like mainstream news, but this was really popular the first 2 weeks, and a lot of people were infected by malware, which we'll talk about in the next couple of slides. Okay, so let's dig into some of the malware trends. We consulted with some of our intelligence sharing partners to pull some malware intel, and then we also pulled some stuff from dark web. In our recent blog that we wrote, we described a Russian underground vendor offering a malware that looks just like this coronavirus map that we were talking about. I want to talk to you guys a little bit more about that. The map is a Java-based malware deployment, which installs the AZOrult credential stealer malware. The kit costs $200 on the dark web if the buyer has their own Java code certificate, but it costs $700 if you want, if the buyer wishes to purchase the seller's certificate, which makes the website look legit. So the map looks just like the real Johns Hopkins map. The real one is hosted at coronavirus.jhu.edu. And the fake one also features live real-time data. So it's very hard to tell the difference between the two. But that's why it's important for us to go and spread the word and spread awareness of these types of threats. So this is actually like the post that we took from, it looks like exploit.in. Exploit.in is a deep web Russian underground marketplace. It's a little hard to get access to this particular forum. You have to have somebody vouch for you, and buyers and sellers on this particular forum are very particular about who they do business with. If they suspect that you're not Russian, it could scare them away. And if they suspect that you're a researcher or an analyst working undercover, they will go as far as to pull their posts off the internet and off of the forum and completely delete their profile. So this particular forum is a really good source for us on a lot of like the cutting edge malware that's coming out. Okay, the second malware that we cover in our report is the REMCOS RAT, the remote access Trojan. The REMCOS RAT malware is currently spreading through unknown infection vectors, and it drops an executable file called coronavirus safety measures _PDF. So they definitely use a malicious document, a malicious file to lure people in. The file is actually an obfuscated dropper that will install the executable on the compromised computer with a VBS file specifically designed to run the rat. The malware is capable of persistence through a startup key, which allows the malware to restart when the victim's device is restarted. After installation is complete, the malware then logs the user's keystrokes and exfiltrates the data to its C2 IP address, which I have listed here. So those are two indicators of compromise right there on the screen for you, the file name and the C2 IP address. And a little diagram of how it works. The third type of malware that we covered I think this is the third and only generic malware that we cover. It's Emotet and Lokibot together. So you remember this email I showed you a few slides ago. Let's talk about what happens when this lands in your inbox. Earlier this month, some of our friends at IBM discovered, where is it? They discovered an Emotet phishing email circulating designed to look like the Chinese Ministry of Health, which you can see on that stamp on the email. The email detailed official emergency coronavirus regulations, and suspiciously it was in the English language. If you do natural language analysis, it reveals that the English in this document is very poor translation. It used incorrect grammar and actually had some pretty weird phrases in it, like, as we work hard to kicking away the virus. So, you know, there's some suspicions there, like, okay, if I got this in my email, I'd be like, why is the Ministry of Health in China emailing me, first of all, in English? They must not know what my job used to be. No, but if it hit my email box, I would be suspicious, especially when you see that language that doesn't really line up. But attached to the email is a .arj file called Emergency Regulation Ordinance, which is a Windows RAR file. When it's unpacked, a Windows batch file called Emergency Regulations executes and proceeds to exfil the victim's user credentials to a command and control IP, which I listed right here on the screen for you. So this IOC, you'll see the IP address inside. That's actually the C2 IP address that it calls out to. So really interesting. IBM didn't give attribution in their report, but if you're interested in seeing more about this particular phishing campaign, you can go to IBM X-Force and read the full article. So let's dig into something a little more, I think it's a little more interesting. Let's talk about ransomware. Right now, around the world, people are operating out of fear. A lot of fear around, especially around not knowing what's happening, not knowing for sure how this virus spreads or who's immune to it, or has it spread already and we just don't know. There's just so much misinformation and so much general information being spread. And right now it's a vulnerable time, especially for healthcare industry, for hospitals and healthcare systems. And there was this rumor that a couple of ransomware groups claimed that they would not hit hospitals and healthcare systems during this pandemic. So that rumor, which apparently a couple of them did say that, it spread like wildfire throughout the media, and all of a sudden there's this misunderstanding that all cyber criminals are going to take it easy on the healthcare industry, which is not true. It's scary to think that, but it's not true. The truth is these criminals operate independently. They're very financially motivated. And even though a couple of groups may have some moral compass, they do not speak for the criminal underground. And we can speak to what we're observing in the dark web right now. it is like coronavirus has taken over dark web themes as well. So I wanted to address first address that, and then address also that on March 14th, the Maze ransomware group targeted HMR, which is a pharmaceutical company that has an active role in, developing these tests and vaccines for COVID-19. So they were actually hit with that ransomware. And then 1 week later, their medical records for patients and employees were released and leaked on the dark web. And what you see here is a sanitized clip of, they had named some of the chief executives of the organization, and then they included the 2,300 plus credentials and zip files for anyone to see, unfortunately. A lot of times these ransomware groups will say, pay us or we'll release your data. And if you don't pay, they often do, but sometimes if you do pay, they still leak your data out there. So it's, it's a tough situation to be in. And we feel for any healthcare organizations that are affected by ransomware. We're definitely trying to, spread awareness of these types of threats and that they are actually still happening right now. Let me get down to my notes here. Okay, so Netwalker ransomware is also a really big one right now. In early March, the Champaign-Urbana Public Health District in Illinois was attacked by Netwalker ransomware, which became active actually just earlier this year, like in January of 2020. So the campaign started with a coronavirus-themed phishing email loaded up with a malicious document named coronavirus_COVID19.vbs. And the file contains an embedded Netwalker ransomware executable file and obfuscated code to extract and launch it on the victim's device. I encourage you to, if you can read the screen, to take a look at this ransom letter. The Netwalker ransom letter actually is kind of obnoxious. It taunts the victim by insisting that they move away from the computer and let the malware finish its encryption process. It says, if for some reason you read this text before the encryption ended, this can be understood by the fact that the computer slows down and your heart rate has increased due to the ability to turn it off. Then we recommend that you move away from the computer and accept that you have been compromised. Rebooting or shutdown will cause you to lose files without the possibility of recovery. So you can see they're getting a little attitude in their ransomware letter. But if you can imagine, if your work computer got shut down by this ransomware, that must be infuriating to read something like that. But honestly, when we're looking at this stuff in the dark web, these criminals are just making a big old joke about it because they're making bank off of their victims, and they really just don't care who it affects or who dies as a result. And unfortunately, right now in the middle of this pandemic, if they hit a hospital that's maxed out with patients and everything is connected to smart devices, it's going to be it would be tragic. So let's kind of continue on that note. Fear and fraud. A lot of criminals in the dark web are scammers and fraudsters. They're not necessarily hackers. They just find ways to scam people. And so threat actors all over the world are exploiting people's fear around COVID-19 in order to make money. And the ransomware letter here on your screen tells the victim that not only did they encrypt all their data, but they can also, quote unquote, infect your whole family with the coronavirus. Obviously not true, but these types of fear tactics work on a vulnerable population of people during a frightening time. Threat actors use these fear tactics because essentially they work. And we've also observed similar psychological tactics used in sextortion scams where the threat actor will tell the victim that, hey, I have access to your camera and I know all of your sins. And if you don't pay the ransom, I'm going to tell all of your family or spread it on Facebook. It's the same kind of tactic that they're using in this particular ransom letter. Like, give me what I want or I will essentially infect your whole family. It's pretty crazy. Let me take a second here to check in on questions. Oops, I'm just skipping right through everything. Yeah, any questions, you guys? I'll just take a look in the chat real quick. Okay, doesn't look like there's any questions. And I'll definitely be taking questions at the end as well. Oh, now my computer doesn't want to. There we go. Okay, so let's get into one of my favorite parts of this report. And it's not that I love this, it's just that this was the most fun to collect intel on because it's so widespread and some of these are just so ridiculous. So let's talk about scams and frauds. You know, people think criminals are smart, but they really don't have to be that smart to make money. They just find the low-hanging fruit and go after the people that will actually go for this stuff. So some of the scams that we've seen include coronavirus vaccines. This is a dark website, which means it's a .onion site. There's some not great English in some of these posts. As I scan through, you'll notice. Okay, so it shows here, this looks like an American. Their WhatsApp number starts with a, a 1. And they're selling what they claim to be a coronavirus vaccine. They accept all different kinds of cryptocurrencies, and it ships from the United States. How convenient. The vendor, whose name is Legal Shop, that's ironic, has a pretty high score, actually 98.4. Very trusted in the drug markets. And by the way, I did find this on a section of a dark website that's related to drugs. So I went there particularly looking for coronavirus vaccines. Okay, this one, you guys, this one's really disturbing. I found this on Own Shop, which is an underground marketplace, and this seller is claiming to sell COVID-infected blood and saliva. $1,000 to buy infected blood and saliva. And, trying to pull a sympathy card there, he says, I do this to provide for my family financially. I feel for you, bro, but no. Okay, so this category was under poisons and viruses. You can imagine there could be a variety of reasons that anybody would buy this. And I'm not even gonna go into those possible purposes, just to show you that they are selling this kind of stuff on the marketplaces. Oh, and I should say, maybe he does have infected blood. Maybe it is real. I'm not saying he's scamming anybody, but that's, they're selling infected blood. Okay, this one is quite interesting. Fast coronavirus detector. I don't know if I said that right, but the English is interesting. Detector. Just the same thermometer scan thing that you find at airports, but he's selling it for $400 and claiming that it's a coronavirus detector, which some people might actually believe that, it will, if they have a fever, they definitely have coronavirus. I don't know. But this is the, another sale that we're finding, okay, people are selling this stuff. Another scam I found under drug test kits is a vendor called CannaCare, who normally sells cannabis products and has a very high rating in the drug market. But this time they're selling rapid test kits to detect COVID-19. Claims that it was developed and manufactured in Shenzhen, China, and it tests for SARS-CoV-2, which is COVID-19, in a matter of just hours. It says you can test up to 48 patients in just a few hours. My suspicion is that these are stolen from a hospital or healthcare system. They better hope the Chinese government doesn't catch them because there's lots of surveillance going on. But yeah, that's what it looks like. But it ships from the US, so not sure like where it originated from. They said it was developed in Shenzhen. Not sure if they stole it from a Chinese place or a US place, but that's interesting that it's being sold on the dark web. Okay, so those are some examples of some of the scams and frauds that we've seen. There were so many more similar to them. We just couldn't fit them all into our report. So let's talk about another threat that's really relevant to a lot of our companies and organizations, and that is fake mobile apps. If your company has a mobile application with your name on it, you should be monitoring mobile application stores for spoofed applications, anything that's trying to mimic your company, because when people go look for it on the App Store, they may be confused about which one is the real one. And you want to get any of those mimicking apps off of the App Store and get them taken down. So if your threat intel vendor is not doing that for you, you should probably find a way to, get visibility into those spaces. It's really important to monitor external threats that wouldn't otherwise be alerted inside of your system. Okay, let's dig in. The current situation has a lot of people asking, like, how many people are infected, who in my area is infected, and cyber criminals have really wasted no time creating a plethora of fake mobile applications to answer those types of questions for you. And they claim to provide the data to you. Some of them are benign, but a lot of them have malicious capabilities such as ransomware, Trojans, spyware, all different kinds of things that can be downloaded. So it's very important to keep an eye on those. And as you can see, a lot of them are utilizing the coronavirus theme. For our customers, some of the hospitals, healthcare systems, even dental offices, you name it, if they have anything to do with treating COVID patients, we've found several instances where their company name was being used on coronavirus type applications, and we were able to successfully get those taken down as soon as they popped up in the App Store. So definitely keep that in mind for defense. That's an important one, is monitoring your external digital footprint. Let me check chat. Have I tried? Mike says, have you tried to buy a thermometer lately? They're more scarce than toilet paper. I bet they are. That is so frustrating. And I totally get why people are going to the dark web to buy thermometers, or as they're labeling them, coronavirus detectors. Okay. Let's keep going. What's next? I don't even remember what's next in my own presentation. Threats to remote workers. Okay, this is one that that we can all relate to right now. We're all very concerned about. You guys have seen, the news about critical vulnerabilities in Zoom or Webex or Slack or WhatsApp. I mean, it's not a matter of which ones are vulnerable and which ones aren't. Hackers are all targeting all of these applications right now, trying to find a 0-day, trying to find a new way in to disrupt our work and meetings and our lifestyle right now. So this is something that is widespread, just the targeting of remote workers in every way, especially when you consider, we work in IT, we work in InfoSec, so we're accustomed to maybe taking our laptop home or working fully remote. But a lot of people right now are entering remote work and they've never done that before. And they're just sent home all of a sudden with no security tools, no VPNs, and no education or understanding about these threats. So the threat landscape just increased exponentially. And hackers have been waiting their whole lives for a pandemic like this that affects everybody worldwide, because really it offers them this great opportunity now to target various technologies and home networks to get into work computers and work devices. So let's take a look at a couple of them. Zoom, we're going to talk about Zoom and Webex just really quick. A quick look at the Insights Vulnerability Risk Analyzer, which is basically a tool that we use to add context to CVEs. If you're familiar with vulnerability management, oftentimes you find out from the vendor or from the company what is vulnerable in their software, firmware, hardware. In this case, what you need to do is add context to it because it needs to be tailored to your organization. So our vulnerability risk analyzer takes scores, and it calculates a score based on, are there hackers, are there criminals talking about this in dark web forums? Is there a known exploit? Is it being exploited currently? And then it compares it to, do you even have this technology in your organization? Do you use this widespread? Like, let's say Zoom is the chosen remote work platform for your company. You're going to want to know some context around the vulnerabilities and the exploits being used against it. Because essentially, just because you use something doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be at the top of your list for patching and updates. So this particular one, we looked at Zoom. It reveals that cyber criminals are discussing different online platform vulnerabilities and exploits. This graph here shows an increase in vulnerabilities in the Zoom application between December 2019 and March of 2020 when we compiled this data. Leading up to, there were critical vulnerabilities that were put out, and then everyone was like rushing to find out what exactly is happening here, what's vulnerable, and then Zoom came out and talked about what they were doing to patch these vulnerabilities and what they were doing to address privacy concerns too. Like Zoom bombing is a thing, just people randomly showing up in your Zoom meeting. And there's a lot of small groups and meetups that are not even professionally oriented, and they were getting harassed by just random people popping into their Zoom meetings and saying really horrible things to them. But Zoom bombing is a privacy issue, and this one in particular that we're looking at here was a security vulnerability. Okay, so let's go to Webex. And even though there's been a lot of publicity around certain vulnerabilities in Zoom and Webex, every online video platform has these same concerns, and they all go through cycles where they're more or less vulnerable. And I think it's really important to choose the vendors that are transparent and that have maybe even recently made improvements in their security and privacy, and take that very seriously. It's important to take those into consideration. Okay, so this one is similar to what we saw with Zoom. It's basically, it analyzes the increased chatter around Cisco Webex meetings desktop app between December and March. And you can read here on the screen what exactly the vulnerability is, and you can kind of follow the context of when it's been patched and see that decline in April as well. So it says the vulnerability is fixed in the new release 33.6.6 and 33.9.1. So that's good. It's really important to keep up with these types of vulnerabilities, and also just to be aware of how threat actors are targeting our remote workforce using these kinds of platforms. Okay, This next section I want to cover, it's not specifically related to COVID, but I thought this would be a really cool opportunity to kind of give you some information about what misinformation and disinformation is. So I've done a couple of presentations and a couple of reports about this topic, which I find really interesting. I mentioned earlier that we're all really confused about where to find news and where to go for good information about coronavirus. And it's important to keep in mind that there are nation states that are conducting psychological operations, which is essentially disinformation around the world to cause even more confusion. And so I wanted to tell you about PSYOPs. PSYOPs is short for psychological operations. It's, I mean, it originated in the military. It goes back centuries and centuries. Countries, nation states, and militaries have been using psychological operations for multiple purposes. It kind of started with like winning the hearts and minds of people wherever you're about to deploy or go into. A little bit of a colonial, like colonization type of mindset. Like if we're going into this new country, we're going to help them set up a democracy. We want to influence them towards democracy and away from the bad guys that live here, and like win them over to our side and see our view. But modern day warfare tactics use this in a very malicious way. And we observed that definitely in 2016 during the US election season. Afterwards, we were able to look back and actually see in hindsight how involved Russia was in our election season. And I wanted to kind of make it very clear that the purpose of disinformation is to create panic and discord and dissent and division in order to weaken an enemy or weaken their democracy or their political system or electoral system. And so the same thing is happening today with coronavirus. But each country does it in a different way for their own purposes. So it's important to understand that it doesn't always look the same. And it's important to also understand that people really are the weakest link in our world. We are all vulnerable to peer influence and to public opinion. And oftentimes we're blind to the fact that there are nation states and governments out there that are trying to create division and dissent in their enemies' countries. One of the disinformation stories that we were following in this recent pandemic, and we're actually coming out with a report on it next month, is related to Russia's influence in Eastern Europe. Right now, Kremlin-sponsored media and Russian government-sponsored media are pushing narratives in Eastern Europe to try to create panic and discord and draw people away from the EU and create this anti-NATO narrative in Eastern Europe. It's really interesting to watch it unfold because they've set up so much infrastructure related to this disinformation, trying to pull those former Soviet Union countries towards Russia and block them off from Western influence. So that's one example. I'm not going to go into all the details of it because we're running short on time, but that's one of the things that we're watching right now. China has also conducted some disinformation around reporting coronavirus infection numbers or death rates. There is evidence of that. And just wanted to give you guys a brief overview of this because there's more, we have more reporting coming out about this in the future. Here in the US, I don't know if you guys received this particular text message that you see on the screen or even saw it through Facebook Messenger. I had relatives of mine forward this to me and ask me if this was true because I've been in the Texas Army National Guard for several years now, and I just retired from there, but they figured maybe I would know something about this. And it says, just got this from a reliable source. please be advised within 48 to 72 hours, it's very probable the president will evoke the Stafford Act. And it goes on to talk about how there will be a mandatory quarantine for the nation, stock up on whatever you need, make sure you have 2 weeks supply of everything. This message just reeks of disinformation. First, they state upfront, I got it from a reliable source, but they don't actually say what the source is. And then they go into the details about it and then trying to create a recommendation, claiming that it's from the government. And then later down the road after this came out, the US government made an official statement that they discovered that it is Russian disinformation. It started as a text message chain and started spreading from there and then went onto social media. And you might think, oh, seems kind of harmless. What is this going to do? Well, I can tell you it created a lot of panic. I had, family members really concerned and worried, people talking about going out and buying guns because of, martial law, asking me if the National Guard was deploying in Texas and if I knew anything about troop movements. It was just crazy. I spent like a whole evening just trying to fend people off and being like, it's a lie, it's a lie. So as you can see, nation states are jumping in on this action, and this is just prime time for them to try to sow panic and discord and dissent within adversary nations like the United States, unfortunately. So as I wrap up, I just wanted to tell you guys a little bit about disinformation on the dark web. A lot of this basically answers some questions that I've been receiving. Are threat actors conducting disinformation on the dark web? Yes and no. They don't do it to each other, but they are selling it as a service. They have these businesses set up with HR departments and customer support and 24/7 support where they will spin up an entire disinformation campaign for you. And it could be targeting, let's say, a competitive company, say one of your competitors, or another person. It could be some kind of slander, or even nation state level where you're going after certain populations in another country. And they're selling it from anywhere from $10 for a couple of social media posts to hundreds of thousands of dollars for very large scale campaigns, which would include, hundreds of bots and fake profiles and personnel. They are targeting both private sector companies and public sector government. So like I said, it's a lot of times it's low cost, quick services. If I wanted to, let's say I'm running for a political campaign and I wanted to do some kind of campaign to influence how people think about my competitor, I could go on the dark web and buy a disinformation campaign from him, which would not be traced back to me. So definitely not suggesting that. So don't go tell anybody that Charity Wright from Insights said you could do this thing. It's possible. I don't recommend it because, it's wrong. Okay. And then I think this is my last slide as I wrap up here. Disinformation for business disruption. This is how it relates to you and your company. Because a lot of people are like, okay, disinformation, what does that mean for me? Disinformation can seriously disrupt your business, as it did with Tesla. Somebody posted a crash video of a Tesla and started spreading rumors about all kinds of problems they had with it. It wasn't true. It was all made up and false, but it spread so quickly that it actually did severe damage to their sales for a while. And this is what I wanted to bring up to you. Your competition can use both business intelligence and business disruption, and disinformation is one of those ways. They can hire their own people or contractors like from the dark web to do these things where they create fake users on social media. They link it to false and destructive information, fake news websites, which exist. There's hundreds of fake news websites out there that look very legitimate. They're just spreading fake news. And that's what's being shared on social media. So they'll use these types of things. Another tactic that they use is sending out, they're not phishing emails because they're not trying to phish you. They're fake emails or fake letters that pose as a CEO or a CFO and create misinformation around, let's say one email went out, it was a CEO and he says, we're changing the course of we're changing our strategy in the course for the next half of the year. Here's what's happening. And that can cause serious disruption in a business, especially if it's really shaking things up and changing things significantly, or if it implies that people will be laid off or that the company is struggling. You're going to have a lot of very upset employees, people threatening to quit, people, you know, just struggling to understand, does this affect me and how does this affect our company? So I just wanted you guys to be aware of how disinformation is being used right now in our world today in this time of this pandemic, and how disinformation can also affect your organization. It's something to be on the lookout for. Now, before I wrap up and take questions, I just wanted to say this is a very high-level overview of some of the threat trends that we've been observing, especially as it relates to criminal underground. But it's very important for you and your company to have visibility into these types of threats. And the only way to do that is to look outside the wire. You're gonna need an intel vendor or your own CTI team to go out there looking through sources like clear web, deep web, dark web. And when I say deep web, a lot of it is out on paste bins or GitHub, proprietary data being leaked, employee emails, customer credit card info, or health information. It's all out there, it's being leaked by threat actors, but your goal is really to get ahead of the threat and stop that threat before they act on it. You know, use cases like, okay, so they got a couple of your customers' bank cards. You can buy them off that market so that threat actors can't use it. You can buy employee credentials or customer credentials off of a marketplace so that you know whose passwords to reset right away. And then also monitoring chatter in dark web forums. I'm gonna say, like, there's a lot of Russian dark web forums where they're specifically mentioning company names, IP addresses, domain names that they're targeting. And if you have visibility into that in near real time, you can shut down that campaign and defend against it right away. So on that note, I just wanted to say thank you for giving me your time tonight. I appreciate it. We made it through the whole presentation without my kids or dogs interrupting. Yeah. And on that note, I'll hand it over to you guys if you have any questions. You might be muted, so you might have to ask in here. Fake news as a service. I like